So this webinar falls on International Women's Day, so we are really pleased to engage with you all around the intersection of Blue Marble evaluation and feminist evaluation today. And I just want to start by doing a little grounding and land acknowledgement. I like to acknowledge I am based in Minneapolis, Minnesota on Dakota land and Anishinaabe territory, but we are spanning the globe here. And so I invite you to share where you are joining us from in the chat if you would like, and also just to take a moment to connect your local context to the world as a Blue Marble evaluation community. Hold that image of the Blue Marble in your mind, and really feel that connection between our local environment and our global context. And with that, I want to invite Donna Podems, our special guest for the day, to share about the work that she does around feminist evaluation, and we will contextualize it with Blue Marble evaluation afterwards, and you can comment on that as much as you would like. But Michael is also joining us, and he is going to help us make the connections between feminist evaluation and Blue Marble evaluation, as well as share about his last 4 days at the conference in Washington, D.C. around climate change and evaluation and the environment and the nexus of evaluating the environment and evaluating systems. So we have a lot to do today, but we're going to start with Donna and feminist evaluation, and really whatever you want to share with us today, Donna, is welcome. We're an informal group and we just are excited to hear from you. So I'm going to share your slides here.
Thank you. A bit of introduction of Donna.
Oh yeah, please do, Mike. Thank you.
For people. Donna was my graduate student many years ago, and my graduate student who has done the most in evaluation. She has been in South Africa now for a couple of decades, working internationally, done evaluation work for a number of the international agencies. We collaborated together on evaluating the dialogues of the UN Food Systems Summit. Donna ran the field operations for that project that ended up having over 1,000 dialogues, half of which we evaluated together, and at some point may share with you the theory of transformation that came out of that work. Donna has been writing about issues of gender and feminist evaluation for some time. She's done articles on it, as well as a book on evaluation generally that is a very personal presentation of what it's like to be an evaluator that I'll say more about after her presentation. But Donna is one of the folks on the leading edge of this work globally, and it's always a delight for me to hear her latest thinking on it. So Donna, we're glad to have you join the Blue Marble Network today. Cheers.
Thank you for having me, and hey everyone, happy Women's Day. I'm very excited to talk today, so Charmaine might have to just cut my microphone off so I don't go on and on and on about some of my my latest thinking. And I think for me the place to start is to very strongly state that I am a feminist. I believe, for example, that men and women should earn equal pay for equal work. I think that in any relationship, each person has the right to not be physically beaten or verbally abused by the other partner. I'm also an evaluator, and I believe that evaluation and therefore an evaluator can play an important role in creating a more equitable and fair society. Having said that, when I do evaluation, I don't always do feminist evaluation. I do Blue Marble. Many of Michael's, of course, approaches, UFE, developmental, principle focus. Many of his approaches influence what I do, as well as many other people out in the field, Patricia Rogers, Jean King, work coming out of Australia, work coming out of Africa. I'm influenced by so many ways of thinking. So where Charmaine was very appropriate and careful to acknowledge the land that she's sitting on, I want to say that my research is influenced by so many people. If I did a proper reference, it would probably be about 100 pages. So to not acknowledge all of the people who have influenced me and my work. And I don't just mean published evaluators, I mean actually the people that I work with. So I'm here today to talk specifically about feminist evaluation and to introduce, I'll say it's a new way of thinking. It's a new framework called principle-focused evaluation. It's not too new to me. Michael and I actually first presented this, or I first presented this idea with Michael. Michael, I was trying to remember when that was, but I think it was maybe 6 years ago at AEA, when I started thinking about feminist evaluation, using it a lot in my work, but really struggling with how do you apply feminist evaluation? I struggled with a lot of the theoretical aspects of feminist evaluation. When I teach about, and you can see my slide here, my position when I teach about feminist evaluation or use feminist evaluation, my position is not to encourage the use of it just to use it. So I don't march around with a flag that says every evaluation should use feminist evaluation. We need to be context appropriate. What I aim to do is I'm trying to educate, and again, Michael and Charmaine, thank you for the platform today, to educate people on feminist evaluation and my new way of thinking about it, which is principle-focused evaluation, which I'll introduce toward the end. And hopefully that book is coming out. I'm writing like mad. Hopefully that book is coming out early next year to share with you. There are some early articles out as well that I can share with Charmaine and Michael for the larger BME network that I've been testing over the past 4 or 5 years, some out of global work and some out of my work here in Africa. In early 2000s, I started writing about work with gender and trying to understand the difference between gender approaches and feminist approaches. And when I wrote that article, and I wrote it in my own voice, and again, Michael's been one to really encourage me to write in my own voice, but at the time I wrote in my own voice and submitted to AJE, I was rejected for my non-academic writing, for not writing like a professional. In fact, the feedback was so harsh. I think I cried for a week and I didn't try to publish for about 3 years. It was devastating. Nobody was interested in feminist evaluation. And a couple years after that, I mentioned the story to Patricia Rogers, and she said, "Show me the article." So I showed it to her, and she gave me a few little tweaks, and I resubmitted basically the same article to JMDE, the Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation, and it was published. And ironically, it's one of the articles that's most cited when people think of me. It's one of my most popular articles, but there was a lot of heartache behind that. I started doing a lot of work in gender and feminist evaluation. I was very proud of my work. I was asked to help start a network here in South Africa called the African Gender and Development Evaluation Network. At the time, I was hired by UNIFEM, they're now called UN Women. I was hired by UNIFEM to do this work. So I went to a major conference in Africa and so excited, we're starting this network and we have money and it's about women and women in development. And I mentioned the word feminist, right? Because feminist, apparently that's not what it stands for. And I was promptly, my contract was promptly terminated because I was talking about feminism and not gender. This is to say that I had quite a few setbacks early on. And then I continued to work, as an evaluator. And I realized that when I got hired as a gender specialist, or I got hired to do feminist evaluation, I was paid about half the amount that I was paid when I was leading an impact evaluation or an outcome evaluation, using the same skills essentially, but I was paid about half the amount. And then I realized I wasn't getting as much work, and all my work tended to be only in gender and feminist areas. So I stopped. I stopped publishing on feminist research. I stopped publishing on gender. I started publishing on things that were more acceptable to the evaluation community. Yeah, I kind of gave up. And And you'll see my writing my publications between 2010 and 2018 are all around democratic evaluation. I put out a book on that, process evaluation, took some of Michael's theories, testing them in the field, published on those, but I stayed far away from gender and feminist evaluation. It was both difficult personally to work with it. It was affecting me financially. So I'm a single mom. I had to make some choices. And then along came the hashtag #MeToo movement. And I have to say, that inspired me to such a degree to see these women standing up against so much more than I had to stand up against. And it really gave me the courage to start thinking again about feminist evaluation and marching proudly with a feminist flag. And around that time, I was trying to apply feminist evaluation and was really struggling with it. And I started chatting with Michael. At the time, Michael was doing a lot of thinking around principle-focused evaluation. And this started my foray into thinking about how can I make feminist evaluation approachable, right? And not just for evaluators. I have a lot of nonprofits, NGOs, foundations that want to use feminist evaluation, but they really struggle with it. And hey, so did I. So I took a couple of years of testing different approaches, testing different principles I could use. And that's what I'm here to share with you today. So I might have jumped ahead on my slides, but Charmaine, next one. Yeah. So a lot of people ask me, why not a human rights approach? I get that quite a bit. Or why are you focusing on women? And I have a lot of answers for that, but I love to go back with statistics because that seems to sway people quite a bit. I say, well, let's look at some facts. Here's a fact. While men are 2.4 times more likely to die from COVID-19 when we were in the heart of it, women are twice as likely to be killed by their male partners in lockdown. And that was a stat from the UK. So why am I a feminist? Why do I focus on feminist approaches and really try and get people to understand them? Well, this is one reason why. Next slide. You can put up all three. Some of the key challenges I was dealing with, as I mentioned, when trying to do feminist evaluation, when I really narrowed it down, it came down to these three. And one was the second I mentioned feminist evaluation, people are offended. They're on their back foot. What do you mean feminist evaluation? And it's the only time I'm a bit jealous of David Fetterman, empowerment evaluation. Who doesn't want to be empowered? Michael's utilization-focused evaluation. Who doesn't want to use evaluation? Realistic evaluation. Who doesn't want to be based in reality? A lot of evaluation titles are so inviting. And if you actually read some of them, you don't know by the title what the approach actually is. People assume what feminist evaluation is without even reading what it's about, right? As soon as people hear that title, they're like, oh, it's not for us. So that was one challenge I was dealing with. The second slide, I'm sorry, the second picture in the middle, you can see it's a bit murky. When I was going through a lot of the feminist evaluation, trying to understand myself what it was, I wasn't really clear, to be honest. Even though some fantastic work was done by some incredible feminist writers, I still struggled as a practitioner in the field. And the third one is that feminist evaluation, and this critique actually goes to a lot of the social justice approaches. Feminist evaluation doesn't tell you what to do, right? It's a way of thinking. And as an emerging evaluator, or I don't know if this term's used in the States, but YEE, young emerging evaluator, someone moving into the field, I agree. The social science, the social change approaches, they're harder to use because they don't say step 1, step 2, step 3. So these are three of the challenges I was looking at when I was trying to think, how do I promote feminist evaluation and make it more practical? Charmaine, next. So a lot of people think that they need to identify as a feminist or be a feminist to implement feminist evaluation. That's not true. What you do need to know to be a feminist evaluation is you need to know the approach, and you need to understand some of the core tenets of it, and you need to know whether or not it's going to work in your evaluation context. taking a step back, one of the articles I published a couple of years ago was about an evaluation I did in Namibia, which was actually evaluating a psychiatric hospital. And my partner in crime for that was a woman who identified as a Buddhist. Now, we developed the evaluation approach together, and when we were done, she was happy with it. I was happy with it. I identified it as a feminist approach, and she identified the core way that we were doing the evaluation as Buddhist. She does not identify as a feminist, but she fully supported this approach under a different way of thinking, or I should say under a different label than what the label I was giving it. So you do not need to be a feminist or identify as one to implement feminist evaluation or to draw parts from it that might be useful to you when you're putting together your evaluation design. Next slide. Okay. So these are the three core tenets that I'm talking about. And one of the questions I also get for people who are more familiar with feminism is, what kind of feminism influences feminist evaluation? And I guess how you implement it, that answer could change quite a bit. But if you look at any of the different kinds of published feminist evaluations out there, these are the three things that they all have in common. And this is what feminist evaluation has at its core. One, that there should be equity amongst humans. Two, that inequity leads to social injustice. And three, gender-based inequalities are systematic and structural. If one of these helps you in your evaluation design, you do not need to identify as a feminist, but you do need to identify with at least one of these core beliefs. Next slide. What is feminist evaluation? We need to look and we need to be able to see what humans are involved in any project or intervention or policy or innovation that we're working with. Otherwise, we're gender blind. Next slide. So a lot of people will then say, you know, well, there's gender sensitive, there's gender responsive, there's gender transformative. How is that different from a feminist approach? There are some actually amazing graphics out there that I need to get permission to use. I don't have permission to use, so I put this here. But when you're doing something that's gender sensitive, for me, it's kind of like, oh, there's people here and they're not all the same, right? You have male and female. When you're looking at gender responsive, you're trying to look at something with an evaluation where you're being literally responsive and you're trying to look for progress. Where when you're looking at an approach that's using gender transformative, you're looking around process and hope. Okay. Very basic and very quick distinction between these different approaches. One of the challenges we run into in the field, and this happens with other approaches as well, Robin Miller has an article out about empowerment evaluation on this, where people mislabel an evaluation, right? So they say that it's gender, but if you read it, it's really feminist or vice versa. Robin Miller did an article, I think with some of her students, definitely some of her colleagues, on empowerment evaluation, where they looked at something like, I think it was like 80 empowerment evaluations that had been peer-reviewed and published as empowerment evaluations, and only a small portion of them were actually empowerment evaluations. Right. So this isn't just a challenge that I have with feminist evaluation. Michael can talk more to this than me, but I think it is a problem that we have throughout our profession. I think it happens a lot with UFE, as a matter of fact, where people label things as utilization-focused evaluation, and they're not. And Michael and Charmaine addressed that actually in their 5th edition of UFE. That was sidetracking. Okay, next slide. Okay, and next slide. That is just a little inspiration. People ask me, why do I use feminist evaluation? And I'm a practitioner. I used to teach at Michigan State University with Robin Miller. I now lecture at Stellenbosch University, where I've been for a number of years. So I am in academia, but most of my work is and my experience is in the field. So why do I use feminist evaluation? For me, it encourages me to ask the difficult questions, right? It gives me a fundamental way to think about and a theoretical backing to do something that's promoting social justice. So it's not just Donna Podems thinking we should do social equity. I have a feminist theory sitting behind me that gives me the strength to do that. I can defend my approach with a peer-reviewed theory. And I think that's important in social justice work. Next slide. For me, I think feminist evaluation makes me a better evaluator because it supports me to uphold my values when I'm doing evaluation. For example, treating the others the way I want to be treated. And it provides me the guidance to do so. When I'm running an evaluation and, for example, I'm doing an interview, when I get to the end of the interview, I've just asked somebody 30 questions that they've patiently answered, and they're not getting paid, but I am. At the end, I do want to know, do they have any questions for me? Because that seems fair, right? They've just shared information with me. They should have a chance to ask me a question. And sometimes those questions catch me off guard. I was working with an HIV/AIDS group in Botswana and with a youth group actually, and I got to the end of my questions and I said, well, do you guys have any questions for me? And one youth raised his hand and he said, yes, have you been tested? Yes, I had, but the question caught me off guard. That's not really where I was going with when opening the field, but it was fair, right? I just asked them those kinds of questions. Of course, they could now ask me. So that's what I mean about upholding my values in the field, and I have a theoretical backing to do that. Next slide. I also think that it broadens my understanding and it leads to deeper insights with more realistic recommendations. And I'll show you that through the principles that I've developed that I'm developing my new framework on. I would say the roots of this really comes from an article that I read by Anne Oakley, which is a very, very old article now, but around her understanding of when you ask people questions, you get answers, right? But if you have a conversation with them, you get better answers. And I think feminist evaluation really encourages us to interact with people, not as us as the evaluator up here coming in and talking down to people, which can happen quite a bit. When you get real kinds of information and you engage with people and you think about and you do co-learning and you think about everything as a group approach, right? You become more grounded in the reality and your recommendations become more realistic. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, because I have these questions before, oh, that sounds like culturally sensitive or culturally responsive, or oh, that sounds like indigenous. There's a lot of overlaps in all evaluation, whether you're reading realistic evaluation or empowerment evaluation or transformative paradigm. If you look at those closely, there's a lot of overlap with the social justice approaches. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so I didn't want to overwhelm you with all of the information on the different principles. The book that I'm writing right now, each chapter, much like Michael's, each chapter will deal with a principle, and then 2 of the chapters are dealing with the overall framework. So sometimes principles, you look at them, you're like, well, what do you mean by that? So I'm not going to go in depth on that today. I will send you to a blog that is under the CGIAR. And the blog is, I don't know, maybe it'll take you 6 minutes to read it, but it sets up the principles so then you can understand how the principles have been applied in a global evaluation. It also has a link to the global evaluation and to the inception report, which explains the whole methodology of how I actually put these principles into action. I don't want to read them to you. You can definitely see them. Charmaine, I don't know if I took too much time. I'm sorry if I did, but I can go ahead and open it up to, or send it back to you and Michael. Oh, but before I do, just to mention, so I'm also a Blue Marble evaluator and very proud to be one. And one of the aspects that comes out in my approach with principle-focused evaluation is its environmental ties. And a lot of, if you look at ecofeminism, right, that's where I pull it from, in ecofeminism, and really thinking about how, if you look at patriarchal structures and how we're destroying the world for money, essentially, right, the same kinds of thinking, the same kinds of values that are affecting global climate change that are negatively affecting our environment are also affecting women, right? I'm sorry, I passed it over and I'm keeping it. I have one more thing, one more final thing to talk about. Because this came up in a class I was teaching today at Stellenbosch, was around, feminism is not around hating men at all. It is around fighting the patriarchy. And I think one of the important things to think about is patriarchy is not just detrimental to women, it's also detrimental, ironically, to men, right? Because where is this whole notion coming from that men can't cry, right? Men go to war and so on. It's coming from a system, that patriarchal system. So I think that's that, yeah. Just to wrap up with that, because I think that's a very important point that I wanted to raise. So thank you. Now I truly pass it over to Michael and Charmaine.
Thank you so much, Donna. That was
Pleasure.
really, really, I hope you look at the comments. There are a couple of very nice comments
sorry.
also. No questions yet, but just want to be sure you see those. And I wonder if we want to take a few questions now, Michael, or if you want to make some comments first. How do you want to proceed?
Let's go right to questions.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments or thoughts that are brewing for folks around feminist evaluation or Donna's experience or the connections? We'll get to a little bit deeper on the connections with Blue Marble, but we are also going to hear some other things, so I don't want to get off track before we get people's thoughts or questions on all of the things that Donna shared. So feel free to put your hand up, or Robert, yeah, go ahead.
Donna, thank you. It was really enlightening. I think I understand most of the principles, but would like you to talk a little bit about Principle 8, which is, I don't know the wording exactly, but it was that it's intersectional.
Sectionality.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think a lot of people, when they do a gender approach, right, they're thinking about men and women, or they're thinking about how does this negatively affect women. And what I'm trying to raise here is that it's not just how it affects women, because a program or an intervention is going to affect a white, educated single mom very differently than, someone of a different race or a different ethnicity, or someone who's married, or someone who's educated, not educated. There's so many places where that intersection takes place that we have to pay attention to. And I think in traditional gender approaches, we don't do that. Although what I do find ironic is gender approaches don't acknowledge other genders, right? So principle focused, my approach does acknowledge that. So it's not just around the intersection of race, class, ethnicity, and so on, but also opening up your mind to understanding that there's different kinds of genders out there, as well how people identify. Thanks for that.
Anything else, you're welcome to put it in the chat or on Misima.
Thanks, Charmaine. Thanks, Donna. Very insightful. I was wondering about Principle 9, where it talks about advocate for and take action to reduce gender inequities. Now, I'm just thinking, so as an evaluator, our job is to go do the evaluation as meaningful and relevant. But then when we are talking of advocacy, or first advocacy, then will it be perceived that the evaluator is now trying to be have some bias in there? And two, if you surpass that question, then the question is, then how can an evaluator take action? Like what ways? Any recommendations from your experience?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's one of the principles, and where I get hit the hardest when I present these at conferences and so on. I mean, first of all, I would suggest, and I would argue, that we're all biased. Everyone's biased. So I think if someone was asking me that, I would try and not have that discussion using that post-positivist paradigm way of thinking of bias. And again, thinking an evaluator needs to go and be neutral, right? What we need to do is we need to come in, we need to have a research design, an evaluation approach. We need to gather empirical data. That's our value add, right? So when we get to the end of the evaluation, particularly as feminist evaluators, because if I do any other kind of evaluation, like a basic outcome evaluation, for example, very few people attack my methodology. If I do a feminist evaluation, it just gets ripped to shreds, even if I think it's 10 times better. So I think as a feminist evaluator, we have to have a very strong research approach. We need to have very clear findings that are absolutely empirical. We need to be able to defend our findings. Now, if we can defend our findings and they're 100%, right? They're solid. This is where feminist evaluation could go on two different routes, right? Either you're going to, as the evaluator, support others to use these findings to advocate. So not just to implement them, not just to improve your program, not just to change the wording on your flyer, right? But to actually take these and address social inequities. Our value add is that we help with empirical data. I take it one step further and say, if you have the opportunity or the ability to be an activist, you should be looking for that. And I understand because I'm also a practitioner, but if I can see a little gap in there where I have a strong voice as an external evaluator and I can talk to the head of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for half an hour and I can make a good point with my data, if I can make a change, then I should do it. I don't see that as being biased because first you have your solid data and then you do something about it.
We connect that to the blue marble principle of having skin in the game. So and I've just come from a conference on environment and sustainability that had all of the major international organizations represented. The IFAD and UNDP and World Food Program, all the UN agencies, the World Bank, it was at the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank. And one of the outcomes of that conference and the consensus of that group is that all evaluations should address climate change and the environment. Because we're in a climate emergency. And there's the equitable evaluation initiative that all evaluations should address equity. Don has given a particular perspective to the equity of it from a feminist perspective, but what's emerging in evaluation, and it's a nuance, so it's worth unpacking a bit more, the nature of the advocacy. The advocacy involves what are the important questions to ask, so that the sustainability mandate is that all evaluations should address how a program is affecting climate one way or the other, or the environment one way or the other. And the equity initiative is that all evaluations should address in some way how a program is engaging with equity, multi-dimensions, different forms of equity, but be addressing equity. So it's advocacy about what kind of questions to ask. Now, part of the realization, as Donna was saying, that these are values-based, is that the most widespread criteria used in the world are the OECD DAC criteria. Effectiveness, efficiency, these are not neutral criteria. These are values-based criteria. Efficiency is basically a military, industrial, capitalist criterion. It's in contrast, imagine that the DAC criteria instead of efficiency was build strong relationships, support strong relationships. Those take time. That runs into efficiency, which is minimizing or optimizing cost benefit. And so what advocacy involves is what questions to ask. It's not manipulating the data. It's not biased about the data. It's what questions to get asked and how to get good data about those questions. And then on the back end, advocating, as Donna said, using those questions, including following up on the implications of the questions. In the new edition of utilization-focused evaluation, Charmaine and I have the final part of the book is about advocating that all evaluation should address sustainability and equity, and that we all have an obligation to follow up on our findings to see that they're used, including trying to increase sustainability and equity. And that puts us in a position of advocating for the findings and advocating for the questions, but the integrity of the data remains. So we're not gathering data to support a predetermined course of action. We're collecting data to illuminate the questions that are important and following the implications of those questions afterwards. So we all need to be able to very clearly talk about how the role of evaluation in helping engage with what the questions are and how we act upon the data is different than it used to be, where you simply ask generic questions and write a report and nothing else happens. So we are in a place, and the connection with the advocacy and feminist principles is very much around skin in the game, that we all come to it. And so Donna's passion for feminist principles is having skin in the game and being able to own your passion. The people at this conference I was just at every level, have passion about environmental sustainability, and including, there were sessions on inclusion that I'll talk about here in a moment, that included quoting Donna's work and bringing a feminist perspective into that. So that's one of the places where Blue Marble and feminist evaluation intersects. Other questions?
There are a few other questions in the chat. I don't know if we want to try to tackle them, or if you want to use that as a transition to the conference. There's one around, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. So let's
I'll read them out at least.
Yeah.
One is from Maggie. Can an outsider really have a meaningful conversation for evaluation? How do you bring other people's perspective and values into the evaluation? And then there's also one about, could feminist evaluation be applicable in matriarchal societies?
Okay. How do you bring other people's perspectives in? It's not always easy. I think there's a lot of tools out there. And I think what the feminist principles do is they help guide you in a way to do that. Bringing their values in can be, because their perspectives and their values, I guess you would be bringing those in together. There's a lot of tools out there to do that, but I think the principles that you're following with my approach, and even with the 5th edition of utilization-focused evaluation, will be guiding you in ways to do that. That's pretty a big question to ask. Michael, I might toss that over to you after I'm done. And I think I do live in Africa. I lived here for 25 years. I think feminist evaluation is appropriate when the questions are around social inequities and they involve women. There's a few case studies that I've published that have absolutely nothing to do with women, actually. I'm going to take that back. That have absolutely nothing to do with women. They have to do with power structures and inequity. Right. So I've used feminist evaluation in those situations as well. The context doesn't always have to involve women specifically, where feminist evaluation can guide you. I think feminist evaluation might be more welcome in matriarchal social structures and systems that exist in Africa if there's an intervention that's aiming to support that. Honestly, I've never done one in that situation, so I can't answer that based on my experience. Michael?
The interesting sessions at the that environmental conference was on inclusion, and this question about how to bring other people's perspectives and values into evaluation suggested that anytime we're engaging with stakeholders and bringing stakeholders together, that when we have multiple stakeholders and we're working with them, that we ask the question, who's not here? That that the inclusion question is not just who is here, but who's not here and what are the implications of their not being here? Who's not going to be heard? So that inclusion then is getting real about you can't include everybody, not at the same level, but to do a serious analysis of both whose values are being represented and who's not there. In the same way that the one of the dramatic balancing issues is the SDGs, and of course much of the work of the Sustainable Development Goals and the work of all the UN agencies is around poverty and reducing poverty. But what emerged in the session on equity was that we ought to look at both ends of the economic distribution, that nobody should be living in poverty. And at the other end, nobody should be allowed to amass enormous resources, that 1% of the population controls 99% of the world's resources. So that we not just look at reducing poverty, but we look at reducing the massive accumulation of wealth at that end of the continuum as a balance that we all ought to be in a smaller continuum of the distribution of resources. And that's a reframing that is significant to be taking on not just anti-poverty, but anti-billionaire-ness. And there are proposals out, serious proposals to begin taxing billionaires at a global level. So that's another blue marble kind of issue in the yin-yang sense of it.
And Michael, if I can ride your coattails on that, I think in the practical way, when I'm doing evaluations and I'm trying to get those voices into the evaluation report, I think that's where I struggle quite a bit as well. If I'm trying to represent all the different groups and then synthesize those different kinds of perspectives, those different values, sometimes you can't synthesize them. They're different. And when I find that happening, I've got to come up with a process, if there's time and money, to be able to have these voices be heard. What happens a lot of time, at least in my practice as an evaluator, is the most unheard voices often have, the smaller numbers of what they're trying to say. They're the smaller group, and therefore they get annexed. No one reads the annexes. So I think in a practical way, we might collect that data, get the data, but when we're trying to put it into the practical evaluation report, that's where I find pushback. When I'm trying to share those different perspectives and having the minority perspectives being shoved to an annex.
Yeah.
That's not such a great answer, but that's my experience in the field.
So I put in the chat a link to a video I did on Donna's book, a YouTube video that takes you into more about Donna's book. And I do want to spend a little time on this conference that I just came from, connecting and building on some of what we've been talking about. So let me share my screen. This is Donna's excellent introduction to being an evaluator in her personal voice, and the link to the video that explores that. The conference I just came from was the fourth conference on evaluating environment and development. And it was focused on integrating environmental and socioeconomic domains for sustainability, which included looking at evaluation networks and communities of practice. Dennis Boers was commissioned by the Global Evaluation Facility to do a network analysis of evaluation networks. And there was a session on inclusion that included Svetlana, who has been working extensively with Donna in the work in CGIAR on eval gender that includes and uses what's called both equity focused and gender responsive evaluations, but explicitly feminist evaluation as well. So there are different ways of coming at this. There's a session on decolonizing evaluation. These are all topics deeply related to blue marble evaluation that we may devote more focused time. But I want to come back to the networking session. So Dennis did a analysis and did interviews with people in various evaluation networks. These are all evaluation networks and associations. One of them is Blue Marble Evaluation, and another was Eval Gender, Eval Indigenous. And out of the session where we looked at networks and looked at how the networks are connected, and one of the things that came out of his survey of networks and leaders of networks and participants in networks was wanting to have the networks more connected and more knowledgeable about each other. And out of that, we came up with a proposal that we would take and build on the Prague Declaration on Evaluation for Transformational Change that was adopted at the International Development Evaluation Association meeting in October of 2019, just before the pandemic hit. And that was unanimously adopted. There are about 300 people there. I was there. I was one of the presenters and in the closing session, but it kind of fell flat. So what we are doing is bringing back that 10-point Prague Declaration, and we're going to organize on Earth Day, which I think is April 22nd or April 24th. It's the third week of April. There is going to be an international Zoom event where we will invite members and participants in all of the evaluation networks around the world to review and sign on to a new version of the Declaration on Evaluation for Transformational Change. And we will post this on the Blue Marble website so that you can have a look at it. And we'll send out a notice to everybody where it is so that you can have a look at it. We don't have time to go through it all now, but I'll give you a flavor of the kind of items that are in it. The first item is to promote transformational evaluation for the Sustainable Development Goals. We commit to the evaluations that help us learn, understand, and support the transformational and systemic changes needed in our countries and the world, as agreed upon in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. A sustainable balance between the social, economic, and environmental domains is crucial in light of the existential threats of the climate crisis, massive extinction of species, growing local and global inequity, and ultimately unsustainable use of the resources of the earth. There are 10 such propositions. And the sixth one, well, we'll put it together since our time is short. We'll put together a summary of this on the website, send out the link to you, and hold your calendars. When is Earth Day? Is it 22nd?
It's the 22nd. It's a Monday, April 22nd.
So put a hold on that day. That is going to be the first ever global evaluation summit for everybody and anybody to sign on to a declaration of evaluation's role in bringing about transformational change that will include sustainability, equity, indigenous issues, and collaboration, participation, and there's some folks wordsmithing between now and then, but there won't be any wordsmithing after that. But we're going to invite people to sign on as individuals and as networks and as organizations, and see if we can't create a global manifesto that everybody can use anywhere to say, we have skin in the game as evaluators and about the future of the world, and here are the things that we stand for. So then it's forthcoming.
Awesome. Great. Questions for Michael? Thoughts, reflections? Anyone else at the conference who's here? You want to share?
The conference was both disturbing and hopeful. It was disturbing in the sense of how little actual international evaluation practice has changed. And Donna certainly lives with this. The results-based management and DAC criteria and very linear and narrow ways of doing the work remain dominant. But people are also actually in positions of leadership finally being able to criticize those approaches. There's new, fresh leadership coming in. See if I can even find, well, I won't. I should have thought of this ahead of time. Let me see if I can. Give me 1 second.
Well, while Michael's talking, you've got a hold on your calendar for April 22nd. We're also going to do another consultation on April 18th. That's our third Thursday, our usual schedule. We went off of that for the month of March to recognize International Women's Day. But we'll be back on April 18th with another consultation. And so hopefully we'll see you then. Michael, did you find what you were looking for? Yes, you did. Good.
So the Global Environment Facility has an independent evaluation office. It's part of the World Bank, and it's focused on climate change. It's for the last 25 years, it's had two directors, both of whom were white males. Gita Batra will be the first Global South woman who has headed a major environmental evaluation, independent evaluation office. Part of the conference was celebrating the transition from the former director to now Gita will be the new director. And in some ways, at the same time, the new director of the independent evaluation officer of the World Bank, the associate director of that, is also a woman. And over half of the conference on environmental evaluation had women participating. They noted that at the first conference 10 years ago on environment and evaluation, there were almost no women present and very few actually from the Global South. And so those are areas of change and progress. And Gita will bring tremendous knowledge and commitment to both issues of equity and environment. So we're seeing those kinds of changes out there, and she's one of the leaders in the space. There were a number of very positive mentions about Blue Marble evaluation. Indira Iran, who is the director of evaluation for IFAD, the International Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, in the opening keynote presentation, specifically said that 10 years ago, when he first heard me talk about Blue Marble evaluation, we were on a panel together. He thought the idea was pretty far out and didn't pay much attention to it. But he'd recently reread the book and realized that he should have been paying attention 10 years ago, and that he now sees that as a direction that we need to go. So there are hints of change going on at senior levels as people are thinking more deeply. And much of that is driven by the clear consensus of this conference that the crisis worldwide is accelerating, what's being called the polycrisis, mega crises, cluster crisis, super cluster crisis, trying to find language to realize that these issues of growing inequality, the pandemic, misinformation, disinformation, authoritarian political movements, environmental destruction are really bringing into question the future of our survival on the earth and of all living things. And so that movement we're all a part of, and this opportunity that will come up on Earth Day to accelerate our own voices in that regard is something that I hope you'll all tune into, and we appreciate your being part of the network as we accelerate our contributions to that work as well. Donna, any final comments you care to make?
I'm busy typing comments in the notes section.
Oh, okay.
No, just again, Michael, thank you. And Charmaine, thank you so much for this platform to talk about my approach of feminist evaluation. And I mean, just to say, and I'm never sure how to say this, but sincerely, I wouldn't be sitting where I am if I didn't have Michael as my advisor and as my continuous mentor over, should I say how many years? Okay, a lot of years. But Michael's always been there. He's encouraged me to publish. When I've been crying my eyes out because my voice wasn't the right voice, Michael was the one saying, continue to march to your own drummer. He's never encouraged me to write in his voice, but my own. So I think I wanted a little bit of space just to say that, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. And you make me very proud for the work that you've done and your perseverance in carrying through. Your voice is being heard and was very much mentioned at the conference. So that's part of the change that's going on. All right, we'll see you on Earth Day.
See you on
And
the April 18th and April 22nd, hopefully, and I will send out the recording of this so you can share it with folks who weren't able to be here. And I know there are some other questions in the chat. We'll try to circle back if there is anything that we missed. Thank you all for your engagement and have a great rest of your day or evening.
Happy Women's
Friday.
Day.
Happy
Bye.
Women's Day.